I was supposed to have been a character in a British period drama. I recognized it instantly when I read Jane Eyre. I fulfilled my nature by being a British lit major in college, and yes, because I know you are probably wondering, I am a card-carrying member of the Jane Austen Society. But this is the story of the time that I met Ralph Fiennes. You see, I feel the closest to actualizing my destiny when I meet the men who played the characters that should have been my love interest in these British period dramas. First, it seems like the pinnacle, right, of the actualization of my nature. The only problem is that when I meet celebrities, I go gob-smackingly starstruck, and words don't come out of my mouth. This first happened in college when Zach, who was in my Shakespeare class, was Zach until he was Benedict. And when I went and told him how much I loved his performance in Much Ado About Nothing, what I said was, earning me the college nickname of Chewbacca. So it actually was an improvement when I ran into Kieran Hines at the grocery store many years later when I lived in New York's theater district. Now, many of you might not know Kieran Hines, but Kieran Hines is a twofer for me, because Kieran Hines played Mr. Rochester in Jane Eyre, and Kieran Hines played Captain Wentworth in Persuasion, which is my favorite Jane Austen, apart from Pride and Prejudice. God help me if I ever meet Colin Firth. But when I saw Kieran Hines that day at the Amish market on 9th Avenue, I told him, and apparently is memorable because I ran into Kieran Hines many times that summer because he was also living in my neighborhood in the theater district of New York because he was starring in a show on Broadway that summer. And was it my imagination, or did he start crossing the street to the other side when he saw me coming? Or duck into a phone booth to make a sudden urgent phone call because I happened to be coming down the sidewalk in his direction. But this is the story of the time I met Ralph Fiennes, thank you. So, my roommate at the time, Susan, worked at a very posh restaurant called the Royalton in New York. The Royalton is known among Brits as the place to go get a drink. And I get a phone call one afternoon at work, and it's Susan, and she says, Anna, you have to tell me everything you remember about Coriolanus. I had recently seen Coriolanus at BAM, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, starring Ralph Fiennes. Okay, so I had ideas to share with her because, after all, it was a British period drama. I told her all the brilliant observations I had about the play. She hung up, shared them with Mr. Fiennes, who was in that restaurant at that day having a drink, came back, called me, and told me, Anna, we have been invited not only to see the show for free, but backstage afterwards. Now, if this ever happens to you, you do not need to bring binoculars to the show, because when the star of the show gives you tickets, you are sitting in the front row, not in the nosebleeds where you are used to sitting. And if you do bring out your binoculars because you want to capture every nuance of every facial expression that happens on stage, what you actually do is reflect the stage lights into the eyes of that actor. So the expression that you see is like a blinky, sort of angry look, kind of in your general direction. And then you go backstage, and a 20-year-old has your name on a clipboard, and you announce your name loudly for the collection to hear, Anna Trester, and you see them thinking, Anna Trester, should I know that name? Why is she going backstage? Is she famous? And they give you this sort of half smile, kind of hopeful, right? Because maybe you are famous, and maybe you will bring them backstage, but you don't. You go backstage and you're handed a glass of champagne, and you're escorted to Mr. Fine's dressing room. When you notice the beautiful woman who used to be Ray Fine's teacher at school, and the beautiful woman who's the costume designer from another production that he was on, and the beautiful woman who is going to be the co-star in an upcoming production, and you and your friend, who are beautiful women, show up and you start to notice a pattern. The people that Ray Fiennes has invited into his dressing room of an evening. Now, my friend Susan, I think, had caught his eye. He really seemed to be taking a cotton to her that evening. And it really might have been her night. Except she had chosen to bring me with her backstage that evening. So when Mr. Fine said, "Anna, you've seen the show before. I want your thoughts. What did you think of my performance?" I took a glass of champagne, took my little sip to try to cover. Susan jumped in with, "Mr. Fine, your production was just outstanding. The way that you connected with your character." And I said, "Connected with your character?" Susan gives me this look. Continues, "Well, I thought the costuming was exquisitely rendered." And I said, "Exquisitely rendered!" Susan shoved me to the other side of the dressing room. But when I got to the other side of the dressing room, lo and behold, the co-star of the show, no one's paying any attention to him, sitting over there taking his makeup off, is the co-star of the show. Nobody's been paying any attention to him because they're all busy kissing Ray Fiennes' butt over there on one side of the room. But it's the co-star of the show, right? So I start talking to him, and it's Linus Roach, who, I don't know if people know him. I know him from Wings of the Dove, which is really only sort of British. It's really only sort of period, and he's really only sort of famous. Turns out I can talk to this man. He and I start having a chat over in the corner of the dressing room. He invites me to come hear him later that week. He's having a Q&A of his film Priest. So Brooklyn Academy of Music, BAM, when they have a play, what they do is they invite the stars of the play to host discussions down the road at the movie theater of films that they've been in. Now, this was Brooklyn 20 years ago, so down the road was a theater that was in a slightly more dodgy neighborhood. I knew this theater best as the theater where I had seen Y Tu Mamá También, which, I don't know if you know this film, has a rather racy, polyamorous sex scene. When I was watching that movie at BAM, the gentleman who was sitting next to me whispered to me during that scene, he whispered, "Hey!" And I looked over at him, and he had a flashlight and wanted to show me how much he was enjoying the film. Okay. So when I went to see Priest, which was banned in the US, by the way, for its graphic sex scene, I was ready. Sure enough, 3/4 of the way into the film, some guy comes lurching in and sits down next to me. Graphic homosexual sex scene begins on screen, and I can feel this guy staring at me. And I'm thinking, oh no, you are not gonna ruin this evening. I am here to talk to Linus Roach. And sure enough, as the scene heats up on screen, I hear, "Hey!" And I go, "I don't want to talk to you! Leave me alone!" The lights come up at the end of the show, and of course it was Linus Roach. Who suddenly didn't remember having met me a few nights before at the theater down the way. Didn't want to hear anything that I had to say about what I thought his performance was like at Coriolanus or in Priest. And as I walked home alone that evening, I thought, really where this all began was with a love of books. And you know what? Books don't fall to pieces if words can't come out of your mouth at the Amish market on 9th Avenue. You know, books don't require a bevy of women backstage in their dressing room to say smart things about their performance at Coriolanus. Books don't shout hey at you in movie theaters, with or without flashlights. And that's fine with me.